The massive space station hung in the void like a glittering jewel, its crystalline spires catching the light of 3 distant suns. The Nexus served as the seat of power for the Galactic Council, where representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered to maintain peace across the galaxy. Today, however, peace felt fragile. Ambassador Kelthera of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted her iridescent robes as she glided through the council chambers. Her 4 eyes tracked the nervous movements of her fellow delegates. The air itself seemed thick with tension, crackling with barely contained hostility. "The humans arrived today," whispered Councillor Vrax, his reptilian features twisted in disgust. The Saurian delegate's forked tongue flicked out nervously. "I still cannot believe the council voted to grant them audience." Kelthera's wings rustled with unease. "The vote was close. Many of us opposed it." She paused, her voice dropping lower. "These creatures appeared from nowhere, claiming territory that rightfully belongs to established civilizations. They spread like a plague across the outer rim. The human expansion had been swift and brutal. In less than 50 standard cycles, they had established colonies on dozens of worlds, often displacing indigenous populations. Their technology was crude but effective, their military tactics savage. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to care nothing for the established order that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. "Their envoy requests full membership in the council," said Treasurer Mocklin, his slug-like body quivering with indignation. "Full membership, as if they have any right to sit among civilized species." Kelthera had studied the intelligence reports extensively. Humans were a young species, barely out of their technological infancy when they discovered faster-than-light travel. They had no established diplomatic traditions, no understanding of proper galactic etiquette. Worse, they showed alarming signs of aggression and unpredictability. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we can use this meeting to remind them of their place." The great doors of the council chamber groaned open, their ancient mechanisms echoing through the vast hall. The assembled delegates fell silent as the human delegation entered. Kelthera's breath caught in her throat. She had expected the humans to send a large entourage, as was proper for such an important occasion. Instead, a single figure walked alone across the polished floor. The human was smaller than she had anticipated, standing barely 2 meters tall on awkward bipedal legs. His skin was pale, almost sickly-looking, covered by simple black fabric. Most peculiar were his eyes, small, forward-facing organs that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. "I am David Chen," the human said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber despite its quiet tone. "I come as envoy of the Human Colonial Alliance." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The human's posture was wrong somehow, too relaxed, too casual for such a momentous occasion. He should have been awed by the majesty of the council chamber, overwhelmed by the presence of so many superior beings. Instead, he seemed almost bored. Supreme Chancellor Vorthak rose from his elevated throne, his massive frame casting shadows across the floor. The Gordanian leader's voice boomed through the hall. "Human, you stand before the Galactic Council of Civilized Worlds. This body has maintained order across the galaxy for over 10,000 standard cycles. You will show proper respect." David Chen's lips curved slightly, an expression the intelligence reports called a smile, though its meaning remained unclear. "Of course, Chancellor. I'm here to discuss humanity's application for full council membership." A wave of angry chittering and growling swept through the assembled delegates. Kelthera felt her own temper rising. The audacity of this creature was astounding. "Membership?" Councillor Vrax hissed. "Your species has existed for barely a moment in galactic terms. You have contributed nothing to civilization, created no great works of art or literature. You are violent, primitive, and utterly without honor." The human's smile never wavered. I see. And what exactly would we need to do to prove ourselves worthy? Chancellor Vorthak's massive fists clenched. You would need to demonstrate that you understand the proper order of things, that you can follow the rules established by your betters. Our betters, David repeated slowly as if tasting the words. I see. Kelthera stood, her wings spreading wide in a display of authority. The Zephyrian Empire has observed your expansion with growing concern. Your colonies encroach upon territories claimed by established civilizations. Your military actions violate numerous treaties and accords. The Kalari incident, added Treasurer Mocklin, his voice dripping with accusation. Your forces destroyed an entire Kalari settlement fleet, thousands dead, including civilians and children. For the first time, something shifted in the human's expression. The casual amusement faded, replaced by something colder. The Kalari fleet was armed and approaching our colony worlds. They refused to respond to hails or explain their intentions. Our defensive response was measured and appropriate. Measured? Counselor Vrax's voice rose to a shriek. You obliterated them. Not a single ship survived. They posed a threat to human civilians, David said simply. We eliminated that threat. The chamber erupted in outraged cries and accusations. Kelthera watched the human carefully, noting how he remained perfectly calm despite the chaos around him. There was something unsettling about his stillness, like the calm before a storm. Chancellor Vorthak raised his massive arms for silence. Enough. Human, your species has proven itself to be nothing more than savage barbarians. The Council has deliberated and we have reached a decision. Kelthera felt a thrill of anticipation. The vote had been held in secret session before the humans' arrival. The decision was unanimous. The Human Colonial Alliance is denied membership in the Galactic Council, Vorthak announced. Furthermore, all human expansion beyond your current territories is hereby forbidden. You will withdraw from any worlds colonized within the past 10 cycles and submit to Council oversight of your military forces. The human stood silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice remained perfectly level. And if we refuse? Then you will face the consequences, Vorthak growled. The combined fleets of the Council races number in the millions. Your pathetic collection of warships would be swept aside like dust before a stellar wind. David Chen nodded slowly, as if considering this information. I see. So this was never really about membership, was it? This was about putting the upstart humans in their place. You understand correctly, Kelthera said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Perhaps you are not as primitive as we thought. The human's smile returned, but this time it seemed different somehow. Sharper. Oh, Ambassador, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here. Something in his tone made Kelthera's feathers stand on end. Around the chamber, other delegates shifted nervously. The misunderstanding, David continued, is thinking that I came here to ask for permission. Chancellor Vorthak's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I came here to inform you of our intentions, as a courtesy between civilized beings. But you've made it clear that courtesy isn't valued here. The human reached into his clothing, and instantly every guard in the chamber tensed. Weapons were raised, targeting systems locked on. David paid them no attention as he withdrew a small rectangular device. This is a communication unit, he said calmly. I'm going to contact my ship now. You will do no such thing, Vorthak roared. Guards, restrain him. The Gordanian guards moved forward, massive beings bred for strength and intimidation. Their armor gleamed as they approached the lone human. David made no move to resist as they surrounded him. Sir, the guard captain rumbled, surrender your weapon and submit to detention. David looked up at the towering figure with what might have been amusement. I'm not armed, Captain, unless you count this. He held up the communication device. Surrender it immediately. No. The simple refusal sent a shock through the chamber. No one defied the council guards. No one refused a direct order in the council chambers. The guard captain's massive hand shot out, attempting to grab the device. His fingers closed around empty air. Somehow, impossibly, the human had moved. Not quickly. Kelthera's enhanced vision would have tracked any rapid movement. One moment he was standing still, the next he was 2 steps to the left. How? The captain began. David pressed a button on his device. Chen to Prometheus. Execute Protocol 7. The transmission lasted less than a second before the guard captain's armored fist smashed the device to pieces. But it was already too late. What is Protocol 7? Vorthak demanded. David brushed imaginary dust from his clothing. A demonstration. You wanted to see what humanity is capable of. Consider this a small sample. Through the transparent aluminum windows of the council chamber, space began to change. The stars themselves seemed to shift and waver, as if reality was becoming unstable. Then, one by one, ships began to materialize. They emerged from nowhere, dropping out of what appeared to be empty vacuum. Each ship was massive, easily matching the largest council vessels. But it wasn't their size that made Kelthera's blood run cold. It was their number. Dozens appeared first, then hundreds. The space around the Nexus station filled with a human fleet that dwarfed anything the intelligence reports had suggested. Sleek, predatory vessels arranged themselves in perfect formation, their weapons trained on the station. Impossible, whispered Counselor Vrax. Our sensors detected nothing. How did they? Stealth technology, David said conversationally. We've been improving it lately. Turns out, when you expect everyone to underestimate you, you get very good at staying hidden. Chancellor Vorthak's face had turned a sickly gray color. How many ships? David appeared to consider the question. In this immediate area? About 1,200, give or take. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. 1,200 ships was larger than most council members' entire fleets. The assembled delegates stared out at the impossible sight, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. But that's not all, David continued, his voice still maddeningly calm. Protocol 7 involves all our fleets. Every colony, every outpost, every human settlement is launching their ships right now. By my estimate, we should have roughly 40,000 vessels moving toward council space within the next few hours. Kelthera felt her legs give out. She collapsed into her chair, her 4 eyes wide with shock. 40,000 ships. The combined council fleets numbered perhaps 20,000, scattered across 1,000 worlds. This is impossible, Vorthak managed. No species could build such a fleet in so short a time. David's expression grew thoughtful. You know what the problem is with your galactic civilization? You've been at peace for so long you've forgotten what war actually looks like. You settle disputes with politics and negotiations. When conflict does arise, you use just enough force to make your point, then return to talking. He began walking slowly around the chamber, his hands clasped behind his back. The guards made no move to stop him, too stunned by the fleet outside to react. Humans are different. We've been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We've perfected the art of killing each other over scraps of resources, territory, ideology, or sometimes just because we didn't like each other's faces. When we finally reached the stars and found all this empty space, do you know what we thought? No one answered. The chamber was silent except for the nervous clicking and chittering of terrified delegates. We thought, finally room to grow without having to kill each other for it. But then we met you, and we discovered that the galaxy already had rules, territories, established powers who wanted to keep things exactly as they were. David paused in front of Kelthera's chair, his small eyes meeting her 4 larger ones. So we adapted. We built our ships in hidden shipyards, far from prying eyes. We developed technology specifically designed to counter your advantages, and we waited. Waited for what? She whispered. His smile was almost gentle. For you to show us what you really were. Today, you confirmed what we suspected. The Galactic Council isn't interested in peace or justice or civilization. You're interested in power, in keeping the new kids from taking any of your toys. Chancellor Vorthak found his voice at last. You cannot threaten this council. We have alliances, treaties. With whom? David interrupted. Each other? The same council members who just voted to deny humanity basic rights? The ones who demanded we surrender our colonies and submit to your oversight? He gestured toward the windows, where the human fleet hung like a dark cloud against the stars. Here's a better idea. The Human Colonial Alliance formally withdraws its application for council membership. We don't want to be part of your little club anyway. But, he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, we also reject your authority over human space. Our colonies stay where they are. Our ships go where they please. And if any council member decides to test our resolve, they'll discover just how good we've gotten at the one thing we've never stopped practicing. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates began shouting questions, demands, and threats all at once. Through it all, David Chen stood perfectly calm, as if he were discussing the weather rather than reshaping the galactic order. Outside the windows, the human fleet began to move. Not threatening, not aggressive, just repositioning with mechanical precision that spoke of endless drilling and preparation. It was a reminder that this moment had been planned, anticipated, prepared for. Kelthera realized with growing horror that humanity hadn't stumbled into galactic politics. They had entered it with deliberate intent, knowing exactly how the established powers would react. This confrontation wasn't an accident, it was an ambush, centuries in the making. The most terrifying part wasn't the ships or the technology or even the obvious military preparation. It was the calm certainty in the human envoy's voice. The absolute confidence that spoke of a species that had never learned to doubt their ability to overcome any obstacle through sheer, relentless force. As the chaos continued around him, David Chen stood motionless at the center of the storm, waiting. And somehow Kelthera knew that whatever happened next would change the galaxy forever. The emergency session convened 3 hours after the human fleet's appearance. The council chambers, normally a place of dignified debate, had transformed into something resembling a war room. Holographic displays showed the positions of human vessels throughout the galaxy, each red dot representing a threat that military analysts were still struggling to understand. Kelthera stared at the tactical readouts with growing disbelief. The numbers kept climbing as hidden human ships revealed themselves across council space. What had started as 40,000 vessels was now approaching 60,000, and the count showed no signs of stopping. How is this possible? Demanded General Tharkas of the Rigelian Defense Corps. The veteran warrior's scarred features were pale with shock. Our intelligence networks are the finest in the galaxy. How did we miss a fleet of this magnitude? Admiral Corthan, Supreme Commander of the Council's combined fleets, stood before the massive display with his hands clenched behind his back. The Altarian's normally composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the fear beneath. They didn't just hide their ships, he said quietly. They created an entirely parallel industrial base. Hidden colonies, secret shipyards, mining operations we never detected. This represents centuries of preparation. Supreme Chancellor Vorthak paced behind the command chairs, his massive frame radiating barely controlled fury. Where is the human envoy? Diplomatic quarters, under heavy guard, replied Captain Zeth of the station security force. He made no attempt to resist detention. Bring him here. Now. Kelthera watched the preparations with growing unease. Something about this situation felt wrong, like they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The human had been too calm, too prepared. It was as if he had wanted to be captured. The chamber doors opened, and David Chen entered flanked by 6 heavily armed guards. He looked no different than before, the same unremarkable appearance, the same mild expression. If anything, he seemed more relaxed now that his fleet had been revealed. "Ah, the emergency session," he said pleasantly. "I was wondering when you'd call for one." Vorthak loomed over the human, using his considerable bulk to intimidate. "Your fleet will stand down immediately and withdraw from council space." David tilted his head slightly as if considering the demand. "That's an interesting proposal. What do you offer in exchange?" "We offer to allow your species to continue existing," General Tharkas growled. "Our combined fleets may be outnumbered, but we have superior technology, better training, and the advantage of fortified positions." "Do you?" David asked mildly. The simple question sent an uncomfortable silence through the chamber. Admiral Corthan stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Human, you should understand that quantity alone does not determine victory. Our ships are equipped with quantum disruptors, plasma cannons capable of cracking small moons, and defensive shields that have withstood the test of millennia. Your crude projectile weapons and chemical drives are no match for Council technology." David's smile returned, and something about it made Kelthera's skin crawl. "Admiral, I think there's been another misunderstanding. You seem to believe you know what human weapons are capable of." "Our intelligence is quite thorough," Vorthak rumbled. "Your intelligence," David said softly, "is exactly what we wanted you to see." He gestured toward the tactical display. "Those ships out there? They're not equipped with the weapons your spies observed. Those were deliberately obsolete designs, meant to make you underestimate our capabilities. We learned a long time ago that enemies who think they're superior make critical mistakes." General Tharkas stepped closer to the human, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. "Impossible. Our agents have observed your shipyards, your weapons tests." "Our public shipyards," David corrected. "Our public weapons tests. Did you really think a species capable of creating such an extensive hidden fleet would leave their real capabilities exposed to enemy observation?" Admiral Corthan's face had gone gray. "What exactly are you saying?" David walked over to the tactical display, ignoring the guards who tensed at his movement. "I'm saying that everything you think you know about human military technology is wrong. Our real ships don't use chemical drives. They use something much more interesting. Our weapons don't rely on kinetic projectiles. They use principles your science hasn't discovered yet." He pointed to one of the red dots on the display. "That ship there, for example, it's roughly the size of one of your heavy cruisers. But it carries enough firepower to sterilize an entire planet. And it can do it from a range your sensors can't even detect." The chamber had gone completely silent. Kelthera found herself unable to breathe as the implications hit her. "You're bluffing," Vorthak said, but his voice lacked conviction. David shrugged. "Perhaps. Would you like me to arrange a demonstration?" "No," Admiral Corthan said quickly. "There will be no demonstrations." "Then perhaps we should discuss terms," David suggested. "I'm authorized to negotiate on behalf of the Human Colonial Alliance." General Tharkas slammed his fist on the command table. "We do not negotiate with terrorists." For the first time since entering the chamber, David's expression hardened. "General, I would be very careful about the words you choose. Humans have a particular sensitivity to being called terrorists. It brings up unpleasant memories." Something in his tone made every being in the chamber take a step back. The mild-mannered diplomat had vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous. "You want to know what makes humans different from the rest of you?" David continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You've all been at the top of your respective food chains for so long, you've forgotten what it's like to be prey. You've forgotten what desperation can drive a species to accomplish. He began walking slowly around the chamber, and Kelthera noticed that the guards were subtly moving away from him, rather than maintaining their positions. Earth, our homeworld, has tried to kill us from the moment our species evolved consciousness. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, plague, predators that could tear us apart with their bare hands. We survived by being smart, being adaptable, and being absolutely ruthless when cornered. Then we discovered each other, he continued. Different tribes, different nations, different ideologies. And we spent the next 10,000 years perfecting the art of war against opponents just as smart and adaptable as we were. Do you have any idea what that does to a species? What kind of creativity it breeds? David paused in front of a holographic display showing human ship configurations. We didn't just learn to fight. We learned to fight dirty, to use every advantage, exploit every weakness, turn our enemies' strengths against them. We learned that there are no rules in warfare except victory or extinction. But the Galactic Council has rules, Counselor Vrax protested weakly. The Convention of Civilized Warfare prohibits. The convention was written by species who could afford to be civilized, David interrupted. Species who never faced extinction, who never had to choose between honor and survival. We were never invited to sign your convention, remember? Admiral Corthan's voice was hoarse. What are you saying? David turned to face him directly. I'm saying that if this situation escalates to actual warfare, you will discover that humans don't share your concepts of proportional response or acceptable casualties. We have one rule. We win. Everything else is negotiable. The tactical display suddenly erupted in new activity. Warning lights flashed as sensors detected something impossible happening throughout Council space. Sir, a technician called out, his voice shaking. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the human fleet. It's like nothing we've seen before. On the display, the red dots representing human ships began to glow brighter. Energy readings climbed beyond the sensor's ability to measure accurately. What are they doing? Vorthak demanded. David glanced at the display with casual interest. Charging their weapons. Standard protocol when entering a potentially hostile situation. Those energy levels are impossible, Admiral Corthan breathed. They exceed anything our technology can produce. Yes, David agreed. They do. The chamber erupted in panicked voices as delegates and military leaders tried to process what they were seeing. Through it all, David stood perfectly calm, watching their reactions with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Kelthera forced herself to think past her fear. There was something else here, something beyond the obvious military threat. The human's behavior, his confidence, the way he seemed to be enjoying their terror. It was almost as if this was exactly what he had wanted. You planned this, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chaos. All of it. You didn't come here to negotiate. You came here to be rejected. David's attention turned to her, and she saw something like approval in his eyes. Very perceptive, Ambassador. Yes, we knew exactly how this meeting would go. The vote to deny our membership was taken before I even arrived, wasn't it? Vorthak's silence was answer enough. We needed you to reveal your true nature, David continued. Not just to us, but to yourselves. We needed you to understand what you really are. And what are we? Kelthera asked, though she dreaded the answer. Apex predators who have grown fat and complacent, David replied. You rule through intimidation and assumed superiority. You've never faced a genuine threat to your dominance, so you've never had to adapt or evolve. The energy readings on the tactical display continued to climb. Several council ships had begun emergency evacuation procedures, their crews unwilling to remain aboard vessels that might be targeted by weapons they couldn't understand. "But humans," David said softly, "humans are what happens when an apex predator meets something even more dangerous than itself. We're the result of millions of years of evolution under pressure, guided by intelligence and shaped by necessity." He gestured toward the display. "Those ships out there represent the culmination of human warfare technology. Not just our ability to build weapons, but our understanding of conflict itself. Every strategy, every tactic, every psychological insight we've gained from our violent history has been incorporated into their design." "What do you want?" Admiral Corthan asked desperately. David's expression softened slightly. "What we've always wanted: room to grow, freedom to develop, and respect for our sovereignty. We're not interested in ruling the galaxy or destroying the Council. We just want you to understand that humanity is no longer asking for permission." "And if we refuse?" General Tharkas asked. "Then you'll learn why humans are the only species that evolved multiple words for genocide," David replied quietly. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. Outside the windows, the human fleet maintained its positions, weapons charged and ready. But it was David Chen himself who had become the most terrifying presence in the room. Behind his unremarkable appearance and mild demeanor lay something that made Kelthera's evolutionary instincts scream in terror. Not just intelligence or ruthlessness, but something deeper: the absolute certainty of a predator that had never known defeat. "So," David said, his casual tone returning, "shall we discuss terms? Or would you prefer to see what human weapons actually do to Council ships?" As if summoned by his words, new alarms began sounding throughout the station. The tactical display showed energy spikes from the human fleet that defied all known physics. Whatever was powering those weapons, it was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Kelthera realized with growing horror that they weren't just facing a military threat. They were facing the revelation that everything they thought they knew about the universe was wrong. And at the center of it all stood one unremarkable human, watching their civilization crumble with the patience of a species that had learned to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. The worst part was the certainty that this was just the beginning. Whatever David Chen and humanity were truly capable of, they hadn't even begun to show it yet. The evacuation alarms had been silenced, but the tension in the council chambers remained thick enough to cut. For 12 hours, delegates and military leaders had huddled around tactical displays, watching human energy signatures climb to levels that their instruments could barely measure. Now, as the negotiations entered their second day, exhaustion and fear had worn down even the most stubborn council members. Kelthera studied David Chen with growing fascination and horror. The human had not moved from his position near the central display for hours. He didn't appear tired, didn't show any signs of stress or fatigue. He simply waited, with the infinite patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. "The Council has reached a decision," Supreme Chancellor Vorthak announced, his voice heavy with defeat. The massive Gordanian looked like he had aged decades in the past day. "We are prepared to recognize human sovereignty over your current territorial claims." David nodded politely. "That's a start. What else?" "What else?" General Tharkas sputtered. "We're offering you everything you demanded." "Actually," David said mildly, "you're offering me what I asked for yesterday. But the situation has evolved since then." Admiral Corthan stepped forward, his uniform wrinkled from sleepless hours of crisis management. "What are you saying?" David gestured toward the tactical display, where new red dots had appeared throughout the galaxy. "While we've been talking, human fleets have been moving. We now have significant forces positioned near the homeworlds of every major council species." The chamber erupted in outraged voices. Kelthera felt her blood turn to ice as she realized what the human was saying. During their negotiations, while the Council had been focused on the immediate threat, humanity had been repositioning for something much larger. "You're talking about invasion," Counselor Vrax hissed. "I'm talking about insurance," David corrected calmly. "You see, we've studied galactic history. We know that the Council has a tendency to make agreements and then find excuses to break them later. We wanted to ensure that couldn't happen this time." "This is an act of war," Vorthak roared. For the first time in 2 days, David's composure cracked slightly. Not with anger or fear, but with something that might have been amusement. "Chancellor, you still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? You keep trying to apply your concepts of warfare and diplomacy to a species that doesn't share your limitations." He walked over to the nearest holographic display and began manipulating the controls. Images flashed across the screen: human colonies, industrial centers, population centers, all protected by defensive installations that defied current understanding of military engineering. "Let me show you something interesting," David said. "This is New Geneva, one of our core worlds, population roughly 8 billion. According to your intelligence reports, it's defended by a standard orbital defense grid. Nothing special." The image zoomed in, revealing what looked like a typical defensive installation. Kelthera had seen similar setups around Council worlds: weapons platforms, shield generators, sensor arrays. "But watch this," David continued, pressing another control. The defensive platforms began to move. Not slowly, as massive orbital structures should, but with fluid grace that spoke of incredible engineering advances. Then they began to transform, unfolding and reconfiguring into shapes that made no immediate sense. "What we didn't tell your spies," David explained, "is that every single component of our defensive grid can also function as a mobile weapons platform. Those orbital stations you cataloged as defensive installations, they're actually ships. Very large, very heavily armed ships." The implications hit Kelthera like a physical blow. If every human defensive installation was actually a disguised warship, then their fleet numbers weren't in the tens of thousands. They were in the hundreds of thousands. "But that's still not the interesting part," David continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone. "The interesting part is what those ships are actually designed to do." Admiral Corthan's voice was barely a whisper. "What?" David's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, when humans first reached the stars, we had to make a fundamental decision about how we would interact with other species. We could try to fit into your existing order, follow your rules, accept your limitations, or we could prepare for the inevitable conflict." "What conflict?" Kelthera asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "The conflict that always happens when an expanding species meets established powers who want to keep things exactly as they are," David replied. "We studied your history, learned your patterns. Every time a new species appears with significant potential, the Council follows the same script. First, you try to integrate them as junior partners. Then, when they show signs of independence, you find excuses to limit their growth. Finally, if they refuse to accept their assigned role, you crush them." He gestured toward the display showing Council ships throughout the galaxy. The Hegemony Wars, the Teclan Rebellion, the Zarathi Incident. A dozen species that made the mistake of believing Council rhetoric about equality and mutual cooperation. Where are they now? The silence in the chamber was deafening. Everyone knew the answer. Those species had been reduced to client states, their independence stripped away through economic pressure, political manipulation, and, when necessary, military force. "So we prepared," David said simply. "We built our civilization with one primary goal, ensuring that what happened to them could never happen to us." "By building a massive fleet?" General Tharkas asked. "By becoming something the galaxy has never seen before," David corrected. "A species optimized for warfare from the ground up." The display changed again, showing detailed schematics of human technology. energy weapons that seemed to violate known physics, defensive systems that could adapt to any known attack, propulsion methods that allowed instantaneous movement across galactic distances. Every human colony is a fortress, David explained. Every civilian ship can be converted to military use within hours. Every citizen receives combat training from childhood. We've taken the lessons learned from 10,000 years of human warfare and applied them to an entire civilization. Counselor Vrax's voice was shaking. You've turned your entire species into a weapon. No, David said softly, and for the first time, his mild demeanor completely disappeared. We revealed what we always were. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Kelthera felt her evolutionary instincts screaming warnings as she looked at the human envoy. The unremarkable appearance, the casual manner, it was all camouflage. Underneath was something that made every fiber of her being want to flee. You see, the rest of you evolved on worlds that were fundamentally safe, David continued. Oh, you had predators, natural disasters, the occasional crisis, but nothing that truly threatened the survival of your species. You had the luxury of developing art, philosophy, culture. Humans evolved on a death world. Everything on Earth was trying to kill us, the climate, the geology, the other life forms. We survived by becoming the most efficient killers our planet had ever produced. Then we discovered agriculture, civilization, technology. But underneath it all, we remained what evolution had made us. The display showed images of Earth, volcanic eruptions, massive storms, predators that dwarfed anything found on Council worlds. But more disturbing were the images of human history. Warfare on a scale that made galactic conflicts look like minor skirmishes. Do you know how many humans died in our wars before we reached the stars? David asked. Nearly 2 billion in the span of just 2 centuries. We killed each other with industrial efficiency, using weapons that could level cities, poison entire continents, or turn the atmosphere itself into a weapon. General Tharkas was staring at the images in horror. You're monsters! We're survivors, David corrected. And now you understand why the Galactic Council was always going to fail when it encountered humanity. He gestured toward the tactical display, where human ships continued their steady approach toward Council homeworlds. You based your entire civilization on the assumption that all species would eventually accept your version of order. But you never encountered a species that was fundamentally incapable of submission. What do you want? Vorthak asked desperately. David's expression softened slightly, the terrible intensity fading back to his usual mild demeanor. What we've always wanted, a chance to exist without interference. The difference is that now you understand the consequences of refusing. You would actually destroy our civilizations? Kelthera whispered. Ambassador, let me ask you a question, David replied. If the Council had succeeded in forcing humanity into submission, what would have happened to us? Would we have been allowed to maintain our independence, our culture, our way of life? Kelthera couldn't answer, because they both knew the truth. The Council's standard practice was to gradually erode the autonomy of member species until they existed only as integrated components of the larger galactic order. So yes, David said quietly, if faced with extinction or submission, humanity would choose to take the galaxy down with us. We've done it before on a planetary scale. Scaling up to galactic genocide would be a technological challenge, but not a moral one. The casual way he said it made Kelthera's blood freeze. This wasn't a threat or bluster. It was a simple statement of fact from a species that had faced extinction so many times that the concept held no terror for them. But that's not what we want, David continued. We prefer coexistence, mutual respect, the kind of relationship between equals that the Council claims to represent, but has never actually practiced. Admiral Corthan stepped forward. What would that look like? Simple, David replied. Humanity remains sovereign within our territory. We make our own laws, follow our own customs, develop our technology as we see fit. In exchange, we leave the rest of the galaxy alone. Your species can continue their civilizations exactly as they have for millennia. And if conflicts arise? General Tharkas asked. David's smile returned, but this time it held no warmth. Then they will be resolved through direct negotiation between the parties involved. No council intervention, no galactic mediation, no imposed solutions. Just honest diplomacy between sovereign powers. That's not how the council works, Vorthak protested. The council as you know it is finished, David said bluntly. The revelation of human capabilities has fundamentally altered the galactic balance of power. You can either adapt to the new reality or become irrelevant. For long moments, silence filled the chamber as the full implications sank in. The Galactic Council, which had maintained order for millennia, was being casually dismantled by a species that had existed on the galactic stage for less than a century. If we agree to these terms, Kelthera said carefully, how do we know you won't simply continue expanding until you control everything? David considered the question seriously. Because conquest was never our goal. We expand to find resources and living space, not to rule over other species. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us, as long as no one tries to impose artificial limitations. And if someone attacks human territory, Admiral Corthan asked. The mildness vanished from David's expression entirely. What looked back at them was something cold and predatory, a glimpse of the evolutionary heritage that humanity carried beneath its civilized veneer. Then they would discover what humans are truly capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized, he said quietly. And I promise you, Admiral, that is not something any species wants to experience. The tactical display showed human fleets maintaining their positions around Council homeworlds. Not threatening, but present. A reminder that this conversation was taking place under very specific circumstances. Supreme Chancellor Vorthak looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. In their faces, he saw the same exhaustion and defeat that he felt. The old order was ending, whether they accepted it or not. The Galactic Council agrees to recognize human sovereignty, he announced formally. All territorial disputes will be resolved through direct diplomatic channels. Council military forces will withdraw from human space. David nodded politely. Thank you, Chancellor. I believe this arrangement will prove beneficial for everyone involved. As he spoke, the energy readings from the human fleet began to decline. Weapons powered down, defensive systems shifted to standby mode. The immediate threat was receding, but everyone in the chamber understood that it remained just beneath the surface. There is one more thing, David said as he prepared to leave. Humanity will be establishing diplomatic missions throughout Council space, not as supplicants or junior partners, but as equals. I trust this won't be a problem. The unspoken message was clear. Human representatives would be watching, ensuring that the new agreements were honored. Any attempt to return to the old ways of doing business would be met with immediate consequences. As David Chen walked out of the council chambers, flanked by guards who no longer seemed intimidating, Kelthera realized that she had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, not just the rise of a new power, but the revelation of what a truly dangerous species looked like when it decided to stop hiding. The human envoy had looked like just another diplomat when he arrived. Unremarkable, mild-mannered, even slightly boring. But underneath that carefully constructed facade had been something that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. A predator so efficient that it had conquered an entire world, then turned its attention to the stars. The most terrifying part wasn't the massive fleets or the impossible technology or even the casual discussion of galactic genocide. It was the certain knowledge that David Chen, for all his obvious intelligence and capability, was just an ordinary representative of his species. If this was what a typical human could accomplish through diplomacy, what would they be capable of in actual warfare? Kelthera shuddered to think about it, and she was very glad that she would never have to find out. The age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of humanity had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.